Okay, we're gonna go over chapter 1 today. The handouts that I gave you are posted on Moodle as Excel files, and I've given you chapters 1 and 2. We're going to cover chapter 1 today, but you'll have to look at the video that I post on Monday for when I lecture chapter 2. Okay, so if you haven't seen it on Moodle yet, this is where you're going to find the lecture videos. Has anybody tried logging on to look at one of those videos other than you? Okay, it sounds like it's set as a private thing, so I'm going to try to figure out how to make sure you all can get that. Can you grab handouts? Just for you. I mean, that's okay. So we're going to start with providing safe food. So what we want to learn in this chapter is identifying when what a foodborne illness is, and when a technical definition of when a foodborne illness outbreak has occurred. We're going to talk about something called TCS food and ready-to-eat food. We're going to talk about the 5 risk factors for foodborne illness. Those you're going to have to memorize. Populations that have a higher risk for foodborne illness. You can grab a handout there. The ways that we can keep food safe, and also the roles of different government agencies in keeping food safe. Okay, so just in general terms, a foodborne illness is a disease that is transmitted to people through food. An illness is considered an outbreak when several things happen. 2 or more people have the same symptoms after they eat the same food. And an investigation is conducted by state and local regulatory authorities. And finally, that outbreak is confirmed by laboratory analysis. So it can actually take some time before you know for sure that you have an outbreak. Okay, so challenges to the food safety, there's quite a few. I'm going to have everything spelled out on this next slide. But time, it's a busy place when you work in a restaurant. It's always, get that food out to the guest first, and it's very easy to take shortcuts. Language and culture, different degrees of literacy and education, the way that pathogens are evolving, unapproved suppliers. We're going to talk a lot about suppliers this class. High-risk customers and staff turnover. So for the time, the pressure to work quickly makes it hard to follow food safety practices. So these have to have that ingrained, and if you're managing a kitchen, you have to make sure that everybody knows their sanitation procedures, like they know how to breathe. Your staff may speak a different language than you do, which can make it difficult to communicate. Staff often have different levels of education, making it more challenging to teach them food safety. I worked at a place in Mississippi called Beau Rivage. It's over in Biloxi, casino resort. We used to get rotating groups of people to come in and take care of washing the dishes and mopping the floors and that kind of a thing. And they may or may not have been able to speak English. I know the one woman was from Costa Rica. She was a college student and like taking that semester off to earn money in the States. So but there were all kind of people working there. A lot of them had maybe just a high school education or maybe not even that. Okay, the fourth thing, the actual biological contaminants, illness-causing microorganisms are more frequently found on food now that food was considered safe before. I think I mentioned in one of the last two classes about eating lettuce was never anything that could make you sick. And now it seems like every other month that romaine lettuce is contaminated. Just this month, red onions have been a source of foodborne illness. So there's quite a few things. Our suppliers, food that is received from suppliers that are not practicing food safety can cause a foodborne illness outbreak. We'll go into more detail about that. The number of customers at high risk for foodborne illness is increasing. We have a larger elderly population than we have before. People are living longer than they used to. And there are more things to make people sick. Then the other thing is training new staff on how to work in your business doesn't always leave time for food safety training for everybody. Anybody ever work in a restaurant? Okay, so how did they train you?
They had a session of orientation about
Okay. And how were you trained? Right. Typically, it's like they take somebody who's good at something, they shove you with them, they show you how to do it, and then move on. Okay. So there aren't a whole lot of companies that are big enough to have a formal training to teach you everything to make sure you're learning about sanitation. Okay, so cost of an illness to an operation, it can cost thousands of dollars or more, depending on how severe it is. A loss of customers and sales. Of course, somebody name a restaurant chain that's been associated with foodborne illness. Pardon me? Bluebell ice cream. Okay, that's a pretty famous one. Like they had to shut down all of their production all over the country. I'm thinking about a restaurant that is practically everywhere. Begins with a C. Chili's, yes. Have you all heard about people getting sick from eating at Chili's? Okay. Maybe you're just young enough to. They've gone through a series of different illnesses in different locations. I mean, I'm surprised anybody would eat in a Chili's anymore. They've gone through quite a lot of things. So like in my mind, like I wouldn't go eat at a Chili's. Not that I ever did that much. Negative media exposure. Okay, this kind of serves as the age of the PowerPoint here. We're seeing newspapers. Anybody read a paper newspaper? Anybody read news at all? Okay, lowered staff morale. If I was working someplace and we had a foodborne illness outbreak, I would want to leave as soon as possible because I wouldn't want to be associated with that. Lawsuits and legal fees. If you make somebody sick or if your food kills somebody, people are going to sue you. Staff missing work. Your staff might have eaten the same food and gotten sick from it, or they might be out looking for another job. Your insurance premiums are going to go up. You're going to have to retrain your staff on the proper way to handle foods. Okay, so how foodborne illnesses occur. And then we talked about this. There's three main categories of sources for food contamination. First one is biological. Second is chemical. And then the last one is physical. So we're going to start with those three overarching categories, and then we're going to go into detail between chapter 1 and chapter 2 on all of the different things that are sources. So biological are living things, bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungi. Usually you can't see them because they're microscopic. Okay, there's bacteria all over the place in this room and we can't see it. There's good bacteria, there's bad bacteria. Viruses, pretty much I think viruses are all bad. Parasites, those are something, like have you ever seen in some fish, you might see worms in the flesh of the fish. Those are parasites. Fungi is molds, poisonous, toxic mushrooms, that type of thing. The chemical contaminants, we have cleaners, sanitizers, polishes. I've got my hand sanitizer up here. I would not be carrying this into the kitchen and spraying it around. It's not going to be safe for people to ingest. Physical hazards, okay, could be from a can opener that you're opening a can, you get the metal shavings on it, or if you have a case of something that's shut with staples, a staple could go flying into the food. If you are wearing a bandage, it might come off and go into the food. Glass is very bad to have in a kitchen. If it breaks and it's the clear glass, it's very hard to see that you get all of it and be sure that it's not in any of your food. Dirt is considered a physical hazard, as well as natural objects that come in the food. So bones in fish, seeds in different types of fruit, that type of thing. Okay, how food becomes unsafe. There's 5 risk factors for foodborne illness. The red star indicates you're going to have to memorize this. So, purchasing food from unsafe sources. And you're going to hear me say approved, reputable suppliers a lot during this class. And an approved, reputable supplier is a company that either is government inspected or they hire a third-party company to come and inspect them, and they will let you see their inspection reports, and that will tell you that they're approved to safely handle the food. Okay, failing to cook food correctly. Okay, if somebody cooks a chicken to 130 degrees and sends it out, okay, that didn't reach the minimum temperature. So that's not cooking it correctly. Most people, I think, would send that back because it's going to be very pink and red and bloody at that temperature. Holding food at incorrect temperatures. Okay, so when you hold food, okay, you might be making food for a banquet for 500 people. So that takes a lot of food, and you can't cook it at last minute and put it on a plate and send it out to a dining room. So you have to cook that ahead of time, and then you have to hold it at the right temperature. If you let it get too cool, it can start growing bacteria. Using contaminated equipment. And there's lots of ways that your equipment can be contaminated if it wasn't washed and sanitized properly. you might walk up to a table and see a cutting board and think that it's clean, but somebody could have been cutting raw chicken on it and just wiped it off with a damp cloth, and you could still pick up salmonella from it. And then finally, practicing poor personal hygiene. So this is like not washing your hands at the right times, or as often as you need to, not taking a shower, washing your hair before you come to work, not wearing a hat, that type of thing. Okay, so we have some other ways of saying this. Time temperature abuse. We're going to learn that there's a danger zone for temperatures in food, and it goes between 41 and 135 degrees, okay? And smack in the middle of that is room temperature. Like 70 degrees and above is when bacteria really takes off. So if you leave food out for a long enough time, bacteria is going to grow on it. Cross-contamination, that's when a pathogen gets onto food that it's normally not associated with. So in the photograph here, if you can see, we've got lettuce with drops of blood on top of it. Okay, so somehow when things are delivered, there was meat that had blood dropping from it, it fell onto the lettuce. Okay, we can see that clearly here, but you might not always see that, and you don't see most bacteria. Poor personal hygiene. Okay, so what this cook is doing is scratching his arm while he's working, and then he's going to go back working with food. Okay, you got to wash your hands anytime you do something like that. Poor cleaning and sanitizing. The way that what I see wrong in this photograph is that usually the bucket and the cloth are the same color. So if you have like a green bucket, that should be for washing. Blue should be for rinsing. So I think she's using the wrong cloth with the wrong bucket. Okay, so, okay, time temperature abuse, I think I went over that. That kind of shows you the range, 41 to 135. That's something that you all are going to have memorized. Okay, food has been time temperature abused when it has not been held or stored at the correct temperature. So something could happen where your cooler breaks down overnight, and maybe it starts up at like 4 o'clock in the morning. Maybe there was a power outage or something. And then it starts back up, you walk in, feels cold to you when you walk in there. The thermometer says that it's 38 degrees, but that food could have been sitting there above 41 degrees for 6 hours. Also, if it's not cooked or reheated enough to kill pathogens. In one of the later chapters, we'll go over all the temperatures for the different types of food. If it is not cooled correctly, we're going to learn about the cooling process. You might be, let's say, we started something this semester. We're doing an internship on the campus. They're selling meals for people to take home and reheat and eat. So like Tuesday, they baked some chickens and put together some lasagna, and they chilled everything down, and then people picked it up at refrigerator temperature, go home and reheat it. But if that chicken wasn't cooked or cooled properly, if somebody just left it sit on the counter for 8 hours and then put it in the refrigerator, that would be a way that you can make people sick. Okay, cross-contamination. It can cause an illness when the contaminated ingredients are not further cooked. So like things like lettuces that you don't cook. That's why like romaine is so bad when it becomes contaminated, because nobody cooks that. Ready to eat food touches contaminated surfaces. So if you're barbecuing outside and you've got burgers and chicken on the barbecue, and you're using a set of tongs to move the chicken around, and you're adding raw chicken to it in the same pair of tongs, and then you're taking the cooked chicken off, you're cross-contaminating because the pathogens from the raw chicken are on the tongs, and then you're taking chicken that's ready to eat or a burger off. So that's an example of ready-to-eat food touching contaminated surface. Contaminated food touches or drips fluids onto cooked or ready-to-eat food. This can happen in a cooler. If you get a case of frozen chicken in and you shove it up on top of a rack to thaw out, and as it thaws out, the juices and things can drip down on product below it, which would be really bad. That's why we always store chicken and poultry down at the bottom shelf in any situation. A food handler touches contaminated food and then touches ready-to-eat food. And that can happen in all sorts of different ways. That they might be working with the raw chicken and it's like, oh, somebody had to step away and this dish is ready, so now they're going to go ahead and plate it up. But they don't have time to wash their hands in between. Contaminated wiping cloths touch food contact surfaces. Somebody might be wiping down a cutting board that they had raw chicken on, and then to set the towel down, and somebody else thinks, well, this is the sanitizer towel, I'm just going to go wipe over here, and they'll be contaminating surfaces. Poor personal hygiene causes foodborne illness whenever the food handlers fail to wash their hands correctly after using the restroom. So this is usually the point where I ask, have anybody, or has anybody in here ever seen somebody use the restroom and walk out without washing their hands? Raise your hand if you've seen that. Okay, all right. So I think we've all seen it. Okay, so employees in restaurants have to wash their hands in the restroom, or you might have a sink right outside of the restroom, but it's got to be right there. Oops. The problem with all of those people that don't wash their hands, they touch the same doorknobs that we touch. And so when you work in a kitchen, if you have to touch a doorknob after you've washed your hands, when you come back in the kitchen from the bathroom, you wash your hands again, or from anywhere. A food handler could cough or sneeze onto food and put pathogens onto it. They can touch or scratch wounds and then touch food. So if you got like a little scratch or something, or a pimple, you're touching that. There's actually 35% of healthy people have bacteria on their skin, on their hair, their face. Staphylococcus aureus is just there. If you touch any of those things and then you touch food, that can grow on the food and make people sick. If they come to work while sick. Okay, so it's very much like the COVID situation. Right now we're asking you that if you don't feel well, don't come to class, okay, because it's so contagious. Okay, so if I feel sick, I'm not going to come in. I'll figure out how to do a Zoom lecture from home, and we'll do it that way. But yeah, if it's that bad, then I'm not coming in. You shouldn't come in. There's all kinds of things like that. Typical symptoms that you don't want to come in to work with: vomiting, diarrhea, fever, bad congestion, that type of thing. Okay. Also, poor cleaning and sanitizing can spread pathogens from equipment to food. When equipment and utensils are not washed, rinsed, and sanitized between uses, we're going to learn the way to properly wash dishes so that they are sanitized properly and they don't become contaminated before they're used again. Same thing with food contact surfaces. You have to wash, rinse, and sanitize. And then your wiping cloth needs to be stored in sanitizer solution in between uses. And we'll talk about the different chemicals that we use for sanitizer solution. And also how to measure correctly if you have the right level of concentration in the solution. If you have too much, it will form residue on your plates, dishes, and whatever else you have, and that can make people sick. Okay. So 2 types of food that are most likely to become unsafe are called TCS food and ready-to-eat food. Okay, so TCS food is food that requires time and temperature control to limit pathogen growth. So the TCS stands for time and temperature control for safety. There's a bunch of different TCS foods. Milk and dairy products, eggs, beef, chicken, fish, shellfish, baked potatoes, cooked rices and grains, including cooked pasta, tofu or other soy protein products, fresh sprouts, sliced melons, sliced tomatoes, chopped lettuce, and untreated garlic and oil mixtures. So again, all of these foods have to be time and temperature controlled in order to be safe. And what that basically means is they've got to be in a cooler until they're going to be served, or they've got to be completely hot whenever you serve them, and they can't just lie around at room temperature. Ready-to-eat food is food that can be eaten without further preparation, washing, or cooking. Okay, so like a banana could be considered ready to eat, because all the guest has to do is peel it, and they can eat it. Salads that are prepared. Once the hamburger is cooked to the right temperature, it's a ready-to-eat food. So, properly cooked food, washed fruit and vegetables, deli meats, bakery items, sugar, spices, and seasonings are considered ready-to-eat foods. Okay, populations at high risk for foodborne illness. We've got elderly people, and these different groups all have a compromised immune system. So elderly people are going to be more susceptible because as the older you get, the weaker your immune system gets. Preschool age children, it's just the opposite. They haven't developed a complete immune system yet. And then people with different conditions that compromise their immune system. It could be people with cancer or that are taking chemotherapy or radiation, people with HIV/AIDS, transplant recipients. There's more and more things that can make you at risk, higher risk for foodborne illness. So what to focus on when we keep food safe? This kind of ties into the 5 things from earlier. Make sure we purchase our foods from approved, reputable suppliers. Make sure we control time and temperature, because that's really the only thing that we can do is control how long food stays at unsafe temperatures. So monitor our coolers, make sure that they're cool all the time and below 41 degrees. Preventing cross-contamination. So by storing your chicken at the bottom of the shelf instead of at the top of the shelf. Practicing personal hygiene, making sure that everybody knows when to wash their hands, how to wash their hands. Cleaning and sanitizing. So everybody has to know when to clean and sanitize, and it's going to vary from job to job. Okay, so training and monitoring. You want to make sure when you're managing a restaurant kitchen that you train your staff to follow food safety procedures. Not everyone is going to have taken this class that works in a restaurant. The requirement is that you have to have at least one person on duty that has a current ServSafe certification anytime that the operation is running. You're going to provide them with initial and ongoing training. So when you first hire somebody, you're going to train them about the sanitation, and then your group of employees, you're going to reinforce that sanitation as they go through things. Because people forget things. I forget things. Did anybody have a class this morning? Could you give me a 5-minute report on what you talked about in class this morning? Maybe. What about on Monday morning? Okay, so this kind of thing takes repetition. In our curriculum, you're going to have these same things, subjects come up again and again so that you become familiar with it. Provide all the staff with general food safety knowledge. So people need to know how to time temperature control and that type of thing. But you might have a certain group of people that work just with chicken, and then they're going to have to learn more things about that. Regular retraining. Okay. And you also want to document the training. Okay. So do y'all know what it means to document something? There is written proof that it actually happened. Okay, so the way you will document your ServSafe training is you're going to pass the exam, and then you're going to get a certificate. You're going to get an electronic copy of your certificate, which you can print out, but you can keep that electronic certificate, and it's good for 5 years. Okay, so that's documenting something. There's a record that this actually happened, and that's why this is all so serious. That's why I don't give you a take-home test and let you do open book. That certificate means something when you get it. Okay, so training and monitoring. The manager's job is to monitor what the staff is doing and make sure they're following the correct procedures. So when I walk around the building, like the thing I've said most often this week is you're either standing too close together or your mask isn't on. Okay, so that's just reinforcing. Everybody knows what the rules are. Sometimes you slip up. It's not light. I know, yeah. The point is the manager needs to address it when they see it, and they have to model the correct behavior. Okay, so if I see somebody that is not wearing a mask and I don't say something, and 5 people see me do that, well, then they're going to think that the mask thing really isn't that important. Same thing if you don't sanitize your table correctly. If the manager doesn't say anything, if the manager has walking with blinders on and doesn't pay any attention to what's going on, then you're creating the culture for your workplace. So you want it to be the right one. If they're doing something incorrectly, repeatedly, they need retraining, or maybe a group of people need retraining. And then if it still continues after that, then they must not care enough to want to work for you. Okay, government agencies. We're going to have to know about this. The FDA is the Food and Drug Administration. They inspect all the food except for meat, poultry, and eggs. They regulate food that's transported across state lines. So if a shrimper from down the bayou goes out into the Gulf and gets shrimp, brings it back up the bayou, and sells it, and it stays in Louisiana, the FDA doesn't get involved. But if they pack it up and they're going to ship it over to Mississippi, then the FDA would get involved. The FDA also issues a food code. It's a science-based code, and it provides recommendations for each state to implement food safety recommendations or regulations. So it's up to the individual state to write the laws for that state. They can adopt the FDA food code as it's written, or they can do variations on it. For the meat, poultry, and eggs, we have the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. So in addition to inspecting meat, poultry, and eggs, they regulate food that crosses state boundaries or involves more than one state. Okay, and this is their current logo. And you'll see it on cases or individual cartons of those products. There's some other agencies. I think we've all heard about the CDC this year, Center for Disease Controls, or Disease Control and Prevention, and the U.S. Public Health Service. These agencies, as far as foodborne illness, will conduct research into the causes of foodborne illness outbreaks. So if there is, if there are a bunch of people getting sick, they're going to find out what the ingredient is and what the source of that ingredient is. And then they can even assist in local outbreaks if there were something in a, they can do testing of samples that are taken from different restaurants. Okay. So those FDA, CDC, USDA, those are federal. They apply to the whole country. And then when we get to Louisiana or any other state, they actually write the laws for that particular state that regulate retail and food service operations. So here in Louisiana, each parish has a Department of Health that has inspectors in an office that cover for each parish. And they come every 6 months to restaurants. They don't announce when they're coming, but it's pretty much pretty regularly every 6 months. So their authority or their responsibilities include coming in and inspecting operations. So we were inspected right before school started. The inspector came in, went into every kitchen, made sure the hand sinks were working, make sure all the dishwashing equipment and coolers are working. And those are the things that they're looking for during an inspection. Any kind of evidence of pest infestation. They enforce regulations. So if there are some things that, like if your building was clearly filled with rodents, they could shut you down immediately for that. That's a very serious violation. They also investigate complaints and illnesses. So if somebody gets sick from your restaurant, And they call the health department. Probably 2 people would have to call after eating the same food for them to get involved. Typically, people call the restaurant. And when you know or you suspect that you have caused a foodborne illness, then you call the health department and ask them to come help you. Okay, they're our friends. They issue licenses and permits. So we have like 6 different permits for all the kitchens that we have in this building. They approve construction. So before we built this building, the plans went to the health inspector office. They reviewed everything, made sure we were going to have enough hand sinks in every kitchen, made sure there's enough cooling, cooler space, freezer space for the things that we were going to be doing in this. And you need that approval before you start building. They review and apply HACCP plans, and HACCP stands for Hazards Analysis Critical Control Points. We have one for whenever we cryovac food and we cook it using the sous vide method, because that uses a different temperature range than normal cooking. So you have to have a specific plan for when you're going to check temperatures and how you're going to do correct things if they're not correct when you're checking. Okay, so that is chapter 1. Does anyone have any questions on chapter 1? Okay, I started typing up a quiz for chapter 1. I think it's going to be due like Tuesday night. So everybody will have time. I'm going to upload the recording from this class. I think I'm going to stop it now if I can. Great. If there are no questions, you can go, and then we meet again next Wednesday.